Hi everyone, it's Philip here. How you getting on? It's the 1st of May for me and almost then 5 weeks of lockdown. And while my watch tells me that the seconds tick on really rhythmically and routinely and everything just moves on, like an unstoppable force, my experience of time is quite different. I at times feel like it's going fast, and there are moments when I feel like it's just dragging. And 5 weeks of lockdown, almost the two of those things go together. It seems like it's been going on forever, and yet also think it's, 5 weeks already? Wow. So just indulge me a little bit if you don't mind. I want to talk about Revelation from different perspectives and propose an idea that might be useful for you. From what I can observe, there's kind of two main overall reactions to the book for whether you come to it with any kind of sense of joy or horror or reservation. And those are the two main ones, the sense of, well, I don't want to read it at all. It's just a bit scary. I know that Jesus is coming again. I know that he has promised he will return. That's enough for me. And Revelation, whether by reading it a little bit and thinking, ooh, that's a bit much, or perhaps by observation of what others and how others have treated it and the kind of language and maybe even the level of fear and anxiety they seem to live by, just shied away from it, whatever they might be. But there's a group of people, a reasonable size, I think, who come to the book of Revelation and think, it's not really for me. I think I'll just stick with the four Gospels maybe. Then, of course, there's the other side, the people who really are very deeply attracted to the book. They're attracted to the heavenly battle. They have a real kind of a frequency band that opens them up to this excitement, perhaps on that level of epic scope of things. They perhaps have a great sense of adventure, perhaps love conflict, love stories that have big worlds in them and kind of epic scope type stuff. And they find that the book of Revelation really kind of tickles that sense of excitement and adventure and spiritual magnanimity. That's not even a word, I don't think. Anyway, so you've got these two groups of people. Now, within those who enjoy the book of Revelation is probably, again, two different approaches, largely. And of course, these are massive overstatements, but that's why I said indulge me. So on the one hand, you've got the people who really, in trying to do justice to it, they want to treat it as literal outworkings in history. As it says there's going to be a 10-horned beast, there's going to be a 10-horned beast. We're just waiting for it. There's these demonic kind of locust creatures. Well, one day that's going to happen. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So that's one approach. The other approach is to take the book seriously, not as, well, of course there's not going to be some weird beast with 10 horns. That's clearly not what's going on here. This is a book of metaphors and signs and symbols, and therefore the way we should treat this is, and because this is scripture, and therefore it's written to me, it's about my spiritual journey. So I need to treat this book as a helpful guide on how I am supposed to navigate as a Christian in a fallen world, so that when I finally get to confront my Maker, I will have maintained purity of soul. So they read the book of Revelation as a guidebook for their own spiritual journey. So I want to kind of suggest that there might be another way of doing it again, right? And I want to encourage the people who come to the book of Revelation with a great sense of reservation. Maybe don't read it at all. That there's a good reason to engage, and that you don't need to fall into one of the either or camps. There's another way of going. Now, I've got a 1997 Nissan Sunny. It's a 1500cc car, 4 cylinders. It has a speedometer that apparently it says the car can go 180 kilometers an hour. It doesn't have a rev counter, but it does have a temperature gauge for the engine. It's got a fuel gauge, of course. It has a radio. It has temperature gauges. various other bits and pieces, the kind of things you'd expect to find in a car. Now, for those who don't want to come to Revelation at all because it's too full of risks, they're a little bit like coming to a car and saying, it's too risky. I know that people have accidents in these things. There's a lot of laws to learn. I don't want to learn those laws. To have other people in the car is a great sense of responsibility. I don't want to learn to drive. I don't want to use a car at all. So I want to suggest to them that Revelation can be a safe vehicle if we know how to treat it well, and to encourage us to get behind the wheel and go for the ride with it. Now, that's the first starting point. The second is this. If you love cars, right, like you love the book of Revelation, and you come to it with this enthusiasm. Now, for those who love to read it with treating it as the most faithful approach is to treat it as at a most literal and face value level. They are like stepping into my car, sitting into the car and going, all right, so I've got all these gauges. Clearly what this car is telling me to do, it says 180 at the highest level. I've got to take the car to 180 to drive it properly. And when I start the car, it's the temperature gauge of the engine's at low. Now, the purpose of that is surely to get it to the top. And if I get my fuel gauge at the top, the purpose of that is to get it to the bottom. I've got a 4-speed fan. That's clearly got to go to 4, otherwise I'm not using it to its full potential. I've got to turn the volume on the radio up all the way, and I've got to, crank up the heat. I've got to dial everything to its utter potential. Otherwise I'm not treating it as the car designers expected me to treat it, and I'm not doing it full justice. There's no point having a car that says 180 on the dial and only going 30 or 40. What's the point in that? You're not using it properly. Now, of course, that for me, I think that's been one really dangerous approach to Revelation, and why the history of Revelation interpretation is littered with car crashes. Lots of really bold predictions about the coming of Christ, or certain ways in which things have been unfolding, and how they think Revelation is mapping history. And a lot of these predictions are, they're just kind of car crashes behind us. It doesn't seem to stop people from trying to make the same mistake again and again and again. But so you don't have to, though, step into a car and push everything to the max. That's not necessary. It doesn't mean that that's the way that you do justice to all the gauges and the signs and the symbols in the car. That's not necessary. And I'll explain what I mean by that. The other approach, of course, is the metaphor approach, is to come to the Nissan Sunny first of all and say, well, Sunny, Nissan Sunny, what does that really mean? It's not really a name, is it? It means that I'm supposed to be reminded that it's the joy of the Lord that gives me strength, and I should have a sunny disposition, not to give in to grief, but to always look at the sunny side. Sit into the car and see the speedometer 180 and all the other various numbers and go, I'm reminded as I sit here before this, that in this modern world of modern technology, it's very tempting to want to push things to the extreme, and that's dangerous. And if I had a rev counter, you'd look at the red line and say, see, that's if you push it to the red line, eventually you'll break and you'll blow up, and you need to test the engine for good spiritual oil, and make sure that you've got the cool water of the spirit in your radiator to make sure that the engine is always humming at an optimum temperature. And of course, that's what the temperature gauge for the engine's for. It's to remind us to make sure that our spiritual engine's humming at the right temperature, and not to push it too hard if we're not really warmed up properly. And if that's what the temperature gauge for the car generally is for, of course. Sometimes you get a little bit too cold as a Christian, and you need to push the temperature up with more prayer and fasting, maybe, and maybe Bible reading and going to church and worship, and just get on fire for the Lord again. Or maybe it's the other extreme. You've become too hot, and you're a bit of a fanatic, and you're beginning to realise that you're tipping over the balance, and you're a bit unbalanced as a Christian, and seeing demons under every rock, and doing saying crazy things and thinking every wonderful dream you have, or every insight you have into Scripture is absolute gold and must be shared with the world. That maybe you need to cool down a little bit, so that's what the temperature gauge going toward the cool is for. Anyway, so as you can tell, I mean, that's not a great way to treat a car. I mean, it's a wonderful way to use an analogy, but it's not a great way to use a car. It doesn't get you anywhere, and it's not really what those gauges are for either. They're not. The gauges in a car aren't so that I might imagine myself on a journey. It's so that they help me go on the journey. So just as coming into a car and treating the gauges as if I'm supposed to max out everything, and that's how I do justice to it, to take everything to its extreme, that's a bad way to drive a car, and it's a really bad way to read Revelation. And equally, to treat everything in the car as if just a metaphor for my spiritual journey is also a bad way to drive a car, because it's not driving. It's also a really bad way to read Revelation, or at least it's a very it's not why it was written. So what is a car for, and what are these gauges for? Well, of course, it's so that we go from one place to the next with as much comfort as possible. If it's a cold day, then the temperature gauge to raise the temperature in the car is useful. It helps you drive better if your temperature is moderated, so that there's a comfortable temperature in the room. Too hot, and you might get sleepy. Too cold, and you might not be able to concentrate properly on your driving. So you put it in that context. The volume control on the radio is so that it doesn't get too loud, that you can dial in a little bit. And of course, most particularly, the speedometer, the numbers there aren't so that you can get to 180 and know that you've taken the car to its fullest potential. It's because there are road rules. And if you exceed 50 in an urban environment, you might well break those road rules and come under judgment of the local constabulary. And so it's not about maxing it out. It's about finding the sweet spot. It's about using those gauges in order to properly navigate and get to the destination. So what is the destination? And so how does this relate to Revelation? Well, let me just draw on one of the major themes of the book, and that is of being a faithful witness. One of the key purposes easily is to help Christians maintain faithful witness when things are going bad. Particularly when things are going bad for Christians because you're a Christian, and it appears as though evil is having its day. Because a lot of stuff that's depicted in Revelation kind of gives a Christian no sense of, well, this is going to be an easy journey. I mean, I'm really not a big fan of this idea of a rapture that would take me away from the earth before things get sticky down here. Partly because I've kind of experienced a little bit of hell on earth already, and I would think, well, why not extract me from that? Why do I have to go through any suffering at all? And particularly, though, because the cross of Christ tells me, and as well as the teaching that Christ gives about the cross, tells me that the point isn't that we would avoid suffering, but that in the middle of suffering, even suffering for Christ against the evils that seek to crush us, that's how we show the faithful witness. And so a rapture idea that would take Christians away from the very point at which they would show faithful witness doesn't seem to make any sense to the great narrative of this story. Certainly it doesn't help. If the church is no longer in the world when the world is going through suffering, how can the church witness to the goodness of God if it's not even there? So that notion of rapture, I think, does real injustice, real damage to the deeper notion of faithful witness and the blood of the martyrs. How else do you have martyrs unless they've had to go through such great suffering that they'd even give their life? So rapture for me is, it's not even in Revelation. Let's just put it that way. It's imported from other stuff, and I would suggest that perhaps not great interpretation of other scriptures. But we'll just set that aside for now. The purpose, though, of Revelation, right, again, it's so that we would be faithful witnesses, because life is going to be hard, and becoming a Christian won't make life easier. It will put you into conflict with the other forces in the world. And so Revelation's always been really black and white, and deliberately so, because there will be times when being a Christian doesn't seem like the wise choice, when it seems like evil is going to get its day. But the book of Revelation teaches us that evil will have a day, but it will not win the day. And Christians might suffer for a time, but we will have eternity without suffering or beyond suffering. It is a way of telling that very story of Jesus Christ and his cross, who, though faithful, suffered unendurable, I would have thought, unendurable suffering and agony on the cross, to the point that he felt completely abandoned even by his own Father, and went to the grave. That seems to me a pretty extreme level of suffering. But though evil looked to have its day, there was 3 days later the great victory of Christ and the resurrection. Now, he is beyond all power of evil to lay hold on him now. And that for me is the great story. So I come to Revelation with this. And in fact, John Buchanan very early on in these vlogs, he sent me this email. He said, I've just been listening to Revelation on, just been listening to it. It's been read to him while he was doing something else. And he said, he didn't get into the details of it, right? He was just listening to it, just hopping in the car of Revelation and going on the journey that Revelation wanted to take him on. And he said, at the end, I just felt hope. And that's brilliant. I think that's really sound and wise. I think that's the way we should largely treat the book of Revelation. That I think that's the heart and soul of the book, that we who will struggle as Christians and struggle in life will read a book like Revelation and feel hope, because God is in control and that the end is secured and guaranteed, and it will end well. If you push it too hard, if you try and over-examine all the details, you end up in a bit of a car crash. And I think that's why people don't want to read it at all, some of them. And in some ways that's a kind of a wise and reasonable response. And if you just treat it as a metaphor for your own spiritual journey, then it doesn't kind of make a lot of sense, or it doesn't have as much power as it could have if you were able to let the book of Revelation also open our eyes to the world that we're actually living in. And it's not, I'm just not going through this journey in life on my own. I'm going through it, struggling under some fairly broken systems, in some fairly broken situations. There's a lot of injustice in the world, and it's not just, the journey of Philip is not the main journey, and I place my own little life into this great big world, this great big context, and trust the Lord not only to take me to the celestial city, as you take the Pilgrim's Progress journey, but actually to take all of history and all of the world and all of creation to this place as well, and I find so much more hope in that, because I have people whom I dearly love and see suffering greatly, and feel that my own my peace is attached to their peace, and I can't just come to my spiritual journey as if I was an island, an isolated spiritual node. I'm connected to so many people, and so the story of Revelation, the great mystery of this Revelation story, is that God somehow is going to gather all things together, and all the injustice will be undone, and all of the evil will be unpacked and dealt with. And He has made that plain on the cross of Jesus Christ, and all who were His enemies have become potential allies and friends of His because of what He has done for us. So for me, the great context, the great epic scale of Revelation helps this little person take courage and hope, because thank God, God is bigger than all of it. And there is no equal battle between good and evil. The battle is very uneven. It's always good having by far the greater outcome here. It's not like Satan and God are equals duking it out in a boxing ring with an unknown outcome. The outcome is absolutely guaranteed. Satan has nothing on God. So there's the great story. And when we hold on to that, we might be helped by Revelation to be faithful witnesses. That's my dream. That's my hope. That's why I'm doing this series, and really that's what I wanted to share, particularly today. I know there's lots of different ways to interpret things. You will have definitely disagreed with some of the things I've said already and probably today, and that's fine. We all are entitled to our own views, and there are many different views on Revelation. But now at least you might have more of a sense of where I'm coming from and why I'm coming to it from that angle. Anyway, God bless you. If you've got any stories to share, if you've got any pushback, if you've got anything to reflect on, add it in the comments. If you haven't yet already, please hit subscribe and hit that bell notification. Then you will get notifications whenever a new vlog is loaded. Anyway, hopefully we'll see each other soon. God bless. Thanks for tuning in.